Do you think it's easy for me to talk about this? Well then, fuck off. Sorry for the outburst, but I'm still trying to deal with the hurt and anger that persists even after all this time. My life was wonderful until I found out that my wife was a gift. I don't think I could even live with the fact that she was a gift, but I still can't understand why Shauna was so proud and happy that she was a gift. She considered it a blessing and did not see it as a curse. Shona Mackey and I first met many years ago while working for a national telecommunications company in Inverness. She was a dispatcher and I was a telephone engineer. I fell in love with her soft Highland accent before I even saw her. Of course, it also helped that she turned out to be a red-haired beauty with a cheeky smile, a sparkle in her eyes, and a scattering of cute freckles. She told me that she liked me primarily because my name is Rob Roy McGregor, after the famous Scottish robber of the late 17th century. Perhaps she enjoyed taming the robber. My work took place throughout the Scottish Highlands, and I was responsible for installing and maintaining masts and receivers for faster broadband access. My boss joked that I was making life safer for sheep by bringing an online portal to farmers. But that wasn't why I liked the job. It wasn't so much what I did that motivated me, but where I did it that made me love my job. The Scottish Highlands are my workplace and combine stunning scenery, clean air, and soft light that makes the heart sing. After the birth of our son Robbie, it didn't take long for Shauna to convince me to move back to her home village of Lomagundy. Looking back, I shouldn't have agreed to the move, and not at all because of the location. The location was lovely, and Shona's mother and sister lived nearby, so we never had a shortage of someone to babysit baby Robbie for a day, evening, or weekend. Unfortunately, I didn't expect Shona to become fully involved in a very tight-knit matriarchal community where the women make the big decisions and the men seem to spend most of their free time in the village pub, sipping whiskey and beer and discussing the weather or the price of sheep. When the sun is shining, you might think that this is a paradise. White-walled cottages dot the lower slopes of the hills, and the village of Lochmagundy is a cluster of modest houses, shops, and small cottages around the village square where the road ends at the head of the lake. On three sides, the village and its surrounding farms are protected by the so-called Ho Magandi, a necklace of high hills around three sides of the Magandi Valley, providing protection from extreme weather conditions. It is a beautiful place, but when the sky becomes cloudy and the hilltops are not visible, it becomes gloomy and depressing. In such dark days, it is easy to believe the story that the Loch, a mountain lake, is haunted by the restless spirit of Morag MacDarrell, a young woman who was raped and drowned one summer evening back in 1744. The details of what really happened will never be known for sure, but it is a story that has been passed down through generations, and it is the legacy of Morag MacDarrell. That is to be the cause of my sadness. By all accounts, Morag was a spirited young woman of extraordinary beauty. She lived in an era when life was very tough and cruel. No one knows exactly how old she was when she met her fate. But the story goes that it all came down to her flirting with local young men. Although she naively believed that a little flirting would help her find a husband, some of the young men were outraged that she was teasing them. On that fateful summer evening, 4 young men ambushed her as she returned home from the fields to her parents. They stuffed a rag into her mouth to muffle her cries for help and dragged her into the deep thickets of purple heather on the bank of the loch. They may have thought that she would offer no resistance, but she must have fought like a wild cat to save her honor. The 4 suspects were later identified by scratches on their arms and faces. Poor Morag took one hell of a beating. Her arms and face were covered in bruises as they took turns raping her. Finally, when they were done with her and she passed out, they threw her into the loch and held her underwater. She was found later that night when a search party led by her father spotted her naked and lifeless corpse floating face down in the shallow waters off the lake's shore. At first, it was assumed that she drowned while swimming in the lake on the way home. But the truth soon became clear. The young people said that Morag wanted to have sex with them, after which they left her alone to wash herself in the bath. They insisted they had no idea how she drowned or why she had bruises on her face and arms. The loss of 4 young men from the available workforce in a small mountain village would create serious problems for the community. Donald McDarrell, the chief of the clan, did not want this to happen. As judge and jury, he decided the case in the young men's favor, ruling that the charge of forcible sexual assault had no merit. After Morag's death, none of the young people were punished. Instead, the boys could continue to work the land as usual, and the local women could only grumble and grumble among themselves about old Donald's failure to punish the culprits. During the following winter, there was much talk in the community about what the consequences of such a gross miscarriage of justice might be. Residents of mountainous regions listen to the surrounding nature and are often very superstitious. Most locals supported the idea that Morag's spirit would not rest in peace, that the loch was now haunted, and that those responsible would be damned by fate. Donald McDarrell, a chief who failed in his duties to administer justice, soon met a sad end. He and his McDarrell brethren, including the Morag murderers, joined Prince Charlie's Bonnie Army in 1745. At the Battle of Culloden on April 16, 1746, they were among the Highlanders advancing on the redcoats of Prince William, Duke of Cumberland. Donald and the young men who raped and killed Morag died a terrible death. Shot or bayoneted, they were systematically exterminated like animals by Butcher Cumberland soldiers as they lay wounded and screaming in agony after the battle. The women of the valley were heartbroken. In addition to losing most of their men, there was the possibility that their fragile economy would collapse, and they would either starve or be forced to leave the valley, begging and prostituting themselves in the towns in the lowlands to survive. The fact that they overcame all difficulties and saved their community testifies, on the one hand, to their strong will and determination to survive. On the other hand, this indicates their willingness to take desperate measures. In the absence of adult men, the widow of old McDarrell became the leader of the clan. She and several women traveled to Inverness and successfully petitioned for a meeting with Butcher Cumberland and General George Wade. No one knows exactly what happened at this meeting, but soon after, Dorlina Magandy's future was secured when General Wade made the site a staging post and supply depot for the British Army. There was only one road leading here, making it easily defensible, so that alone was a good enough reason for Wade's decision. However, it appears that the women living in this clearing also gave their word to General Wade that the soldiers temporarily stationed with them would be received with great cordiality. And indeed they were. So much so that at the end of the 18th century, the name of the towering Hoch Magandy mountain range became synonymous with good sekali, a slang expression for wild and possibly illicit sex. It meant getting some ho Magandy. Many Highlanders considered the actions of the Magandy Valley women shameful, but others saw them as a positive and practical strategy with no real alternative. Soldiers came and went, and the seeds of community restoration were sown. Literally. Unlike other depopulated areas of the Highlands, Magandy Valley flourished. The women enjoyed peace and quiet and earned enough to support themselves and their families by producing fine hand-woven woolen clothing that quickly became in demand in Edinburgh and London. A new generation of children, including many bastards of mixed redskin and McDarrell blood, grew up in a matriarchal society where the burden of leadership was passed from eldest daughter to eldest daughter. Mindful of Morag McDarrell's fate, the women of the valley have also taken steps they believe will eliminate the risk of any such sexual aggression in the future. We lived in Lochmandy for about 5 years, and we're approaching our 7th wedding anniversary when my life took a turn for the worse. That year, I was happy as a hog in the mud as spring gradually turned into summer. Every time I returned home after days on the road, Shauna was like a bitch in heat. It's not that she was wildly sexy or had me half to death. Everything is much more loving. She kissed me more often, and at every opportunity, she ran her hands through my hair, touched my arm, stroked me with her hands, or rubbed against me. More often than not, her expressions of affection resulted in us making love. She didn't just want a quickie, but she wanted me to take the time to do all the touching, groping, and exploring to make her feel loved, wanted, and comforted. It reminded me of how she was when we first started dating, and I liked that she was trying to be more romantic. That Friday was pretty typical. Little Robbie was at a sleepover at Aunt Maggie and Uncle Duncan's house, visiting his cousin, another copper-haired 6-year-old named Malcolm. We nicknamed these two Ginger Nuts. Returning home from a week of maintenance inspections up north, I stopped by to say hello to Robbie and thank Maggie and Duncan for letting Shauna and I have the night to ourselves. Robbie quickly hugged me, but I played second fiddle. He was more interested in running with Malcolm. I remember thinking that they would probably be best friends forever. When I got home, the delicious aroma of beef stew with wild mountain thyme wafted from the kitchen. Shauna bustled around, setting the dining room table. She added a couple of tall candles, which was usually a sign that she wanted romance, and there was an open bottle of Côtes du Rhône on the table. She brought me a cold beer while I hung up my coat and put my dirty laundry in the laundry basket. After a week of working outside the home, it always takes me about half an hour to relax and get into the mood at home. Shauna was already used to this and didn't expect me to start any meaningful conversation right away. Instead, she filled the silence by talking about her day or week and the latest gossip. I relaxed with my beer while she pottered around the kitchen, stirring stews and putting plates in the top oven to warm up, chatting about the feast the next evening. The celebration was to mark the 18th birthday of Callum McDarrell, whose mother was the chief. The celebration will feature a top-notch fiddle band and Scottish country dancing. People were going to come from all over the area, and the village hall would be filled with people of all ages, from toddlers to frail pensioners. Shona became good friends with Fiona, the female chief, and helped Fiona and Dougal, her husband, organize the party. In recent weeks, Shauna seemed to be there every time I called her while I was away from home. She was incredibly excited about the preparations for Callum's birthday party and told me more than once how honored she was to be chosen as an assistant. Over dinner, she talked about how wonderful the day would be and how amazing it was that Callum had grown up so quickly and would be 18 tomorrow. She gave him a gold ring engraved with the intertwined initials KSH, which she showed me that evening after dinner, as we sat in the living room enjoying whiskey from nearby Glenfarclas. "So why isn't CM Callum McDarrell here?" I asked. Exactly. Well, his middle name is Shaw," she answered quickly, closing the small red velvet box and setting it on the coffee table. I didn't think much of it at that moment, because she gave me one of her special looks. Her twinkling eyes and mischievous grin said she was ready for bed. Cottages in the Highlands are usually single story, and ours was no exception. So we have no stairs to climb, and it wasn't long before we found ourselves between the sheets on our king-sized bed. I hugged her and kissed her tenderly, and then she climbed over me, threw back the sheet and began to rub her erect private part against the lower part of my rapidly hardening manhood. "Ah, yes," she muttered, looking me straight in the eyes. "I just love being on top." We set off at a gallop, and there was no doubt about who was riding who. I tried to keep up, but soon she was bouncing up and down like a cowgirl riding a bronco, screaming and yelling about how she needed to be fucked harder. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, she stopped bouncing on me. She climaxed, shuddering and moaning, and I followed her. Still sitting on top of me, she fell onto my chest. She whispered. "Thank you, Rob. It was truly something. I love you so much." "I love you too," I whispered back, pulling the sheet over us. With Robbie gone for the night, I thought Saturday morning would give us time for some slow lovemaking. But Shauna rose before dawn, leaving me to doze while she showered and got dressed. "Good morning, lazy fellow," she said as I sat up in bed and watched her preening in the mirror. "I'm just going to see Fiona, but on the way back I'll stop by the bakery and buy us some buns for breakfast. You can still lie around, and after breakfast we'll pick up Robbie." I thought about lying in bed after she left, but decided to get up and do housework. After a quick shower, I changed into jeans and my favorite green and black plaid shirt, loaded the washing machine, and headed out to tidy up the living room before moving on to the rest of my chores. The small red box with the ring still lay on the coffee table. Nearby lay an envelope addressed to Callum McDarrell, which undoubtedly contained a greeting card. Looks like Shauna forgot to take them with her. We probably could have given them to Callum that evening, but I thought it would be easier to take them with us straight away. The chief's cottage stood alone in the middle of the land legally owned by the chief and was relatively isolated. But it was less than a mile away via a shortcut across the fields, and I thought the fresh air would blow away the cobwebs left by the Balvenie beer. While walking through fields with long, lush meadow grass, which sheep are very fond of, a village on the shore of a lake was visible in the distance. I had to climb over a couple of dry stone walls, but it only took me 20 minutes to reach the stone barn adjacent to the cottage. To get to the front door of the cottage, I had to go around the back of the barn and along the north side of the cottage. The chief's cottage is an old single-story Highland-style house, long and low, with thick, whitewashed walls and a black slate roof, originally thatched. When it was built over 200 years ago, it was important to minimize heat loss, so the windows are quite small, especially on the north and west sides of the cottage, facing the prevailing winds and bad weather. However, walking along the north side of the cottage, the window I passed was large enough for me to catch a glimpse of my wife, which made me stop in my tracks. It was clearly a bedroom, and she was on the king-sized bed, completely naked, bouncing up and down cowgirl style on someone else, just like she'd had sex with me the night before. She didn't see me because I was looking at her from the left, and her long red mane was whipping around as her head jerked up and down as she rode her partner. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen. It seemed as if the world had stopped. The couple in the bedroom switched positions, and the man stood behind her. At first, I didn't understand who it was, since his back was to me, but then I saw that it was Callum McDarrell. He was grinning from ear to ear at Shauna. I stood there, numb with shock. I watched in horror as they reached the finish line and collapsed on the bed. I backed away from the window and leaned my back against the outer wall of the cottage, barely breathing. I realized that I must have stopped breathing normally while the terrible sight unfolded in front of me. I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, but now I feel physically ill. My mind screamed in protest at the information I had just received, and my body tensed in an attempt to clear itself. I lowered my head between my legs and took a deep breath, trying to regain control of myself. I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe a couple of minutes. I was stunned. But as a maintenance engineer, I was trained to solve complex problems. Sharp reactions are not my style. I had no idea why Shauna was having sex with Callum, but if I struck immediately, others might get hurt. My main concern was baby Robbie, and I needed to know more about what was going on before taking any drastic action. I trudged toward the house, keeping the barn and a small clump of pine trees between the chief's cottage and myself, so as not to be noticed, although this was unlikely. Thoughts were confused. It seemed obvious that Shauna had planned everything. She was unlucky that I decided to refuse the opportunity to lie in bed and instead decided to deliver the card and gift she had forgotten. Most likely, she forgot to bring a card and a ring simply because she was preoccupied with going there and letting Callum fuck her thoroughly. It looked like hot and intense sex. Perhaps it was his first time and she had just taken his virginity. Or has he had it for a long time? I didn't know this. They were in his bedroom at his parents' house. Do his parents know that my wife is having violent sex with their son? It was an important day in their son's life, so I couldn't imagine that they weren't home that morning. They should have known what was going on, unless they were blind and deaf. I was shocked, confused, and angry. I knew I couldn't deal with Shauna right away and needed to gather my thoughts. When I got back to my house, I put the card and gift for Callum back on the coffee table. I left a note in the kitchen for Shauna saying that I had decided to take advantage of the dry weather and go for a walk in Hoke Magandi. She knew that I liked to do this fairly regularly and that my standard procedure was to pack a lunch to walk 12 miles in a horseshoe pattern around the 3 highest peaks in about 6 hours. Over the next few hours, I put all my energy into walking through the hills, and the magnificent views from the tops of the hills allowed me to calm down a little and begin to recover from the shock of my wife's infidelity. Returning home late in the evening, I still didn't know what I was going to do. There seemed to be no point in crying over spilled milk, But the nature of my relationship with my wife would have to be reconsidered, and I might have to make some difficult decisions. One thing was clear for sure. I wasn't about to upset the apple cart by doing any sort of showdown before the evening's festivities, because gossip spreads like wildfire in mountain communities. Everyone does their part, comparing notes and spreading guesses, rumors, and lies. In no way did I want society to be involved in our personal lives. The holiday is a high-risk event, and gossipers might feast on random scraps of information, such as a missing husband, an upset wife, or a beaten birthday boy. The walk in the hills cleared my mind, but when I returned after lunch, I was still finding it difficult to meet Shauna. Luckily, Robbie was a useful distraction as he sat next to me on the couch, talking about what he had been doing with his cousin. The highlight was meeting the snails his cousin Malcolm found in the garden. For a 6-year-old, Robbie was quite knowledgeable about the natural world, and we had an interesting discussion about the difference between snails and slugs.